This is Dan Gwynn with Francis Schaeffer Studies, and this is the 6th edition of Speaking Truth to Tension, the podcast of FrancisSchaefferStudies.org. And I'm excited for this edition because we're finally getting to one of the core topics that I wanted to address. In the intro segment, before diverting over to the L'Abri conference coverage that we did, we talked briefly about the topic of tension. However, I thought that it would be good to take that notion a bit deeper. What do we mean when we say tension? What did Dr. Schaeffer mean by that concept of tension, and why is it so important for us to even talk about it? So to start things off, I spoke with Dr. Williams on the subject to get his insights, and so here's that. Dr. Williams, if you could, what would you say, or how would you explain Dr. Schaeffer's concept of worldview tension?
Well, there is a tension between a person's worldview and reality if his worldview doesn't fit reality. And so there are two places at which your worldview is going to give you problems. One is your relationship to the world, and the other is your relationship to yourself. So you have the order of creation, you have the mannishness of man. And if your worldview tells you that that all you can possibly be is a little bit more complicated animal, or all you can possibly be is a machine made out of protoplasm instead of out of circuits, then this, of course, doesn't fit with the reality of who you are as a person created in the image of God. You have aspirations for meaning, for love, that your worldview doesn't allow them to be fulfilled. So you've got this constant conflict between what you believe and reality just doesn't cooperate with it. You know, you'd like to believe in relativism because it alleviates you of the burden of judging other people, and it seems like it would let you do whatever you want to do, and reality just won't cooperate with you because all somebody has to do is break God's law with you or someone you love as the victim, and your relativism goes out the window.
Yeah, one of the things Schaeffer had talked about, he talked about that sometimes we have to push on tension. So, and of course, the topic of this podcast, the title of this podcast, Speaking Truth to Tension. But how would you say that we do that? What's the best way to go about speaking to tension?
Well, I often use the illustration Schaeffer used of the guy he was talking to who didn't believe there was any real difference between right and wrong. And Schaeffer was serving tea, so he holds the boiling teapot over the guy's head. And so it really doesn't matter whether I pour the tea on your head or in the cup, right? And the guy either has to admit that it makes a difference, or he has to admit that it makes a difference because his worldview doesn't permit him to say it. So you put him in a position where he can't escape, because what we do is we become very adept at building hiding places in our worldview where we can escape the tension. We just don't think about it. We think about things very selectively, only when it's convenient. And so that boiling water in the tea kettle is a pretty good way of preventing people from doing that. Unfortunately, threatening people with bodily harm is not really a normal recommended apologetic technique. But you can do the thought experiment. You know, if I knock you in the head, take your wallet, use your credit cards to steal your identity, and not only empty your bank account, but just saddle you with the horrible burden of trying to fix all of this. Uh, and you're telling me that, I mean, you've been telling me that essentially might makes right, and so I'm justified in doing this because I got away with it.
Exactly. Exactly.
No, you're not really. You're not really going to accept that if it's a real situation and if it's not purely hypothetical. Um, so, yeah, I've never met a real relativist. People think they're relativists because, like I said, it fulfills two felt needs. They don't want to have to judge other people, and they want to be able to do whatever they please. But if you press them, you discover they all have something that's an absolute. You know, sexual ethics may be totally relativistic, but in their mind, if you're destroying the planet, that's just wrong. You know, if you're not, if you've got too big of a carbon footprint, it's always something. I think the most wonderful picture of it that I can think of is from C.S. Lewis's space trilogy. On Malacandra, Ransom has got Weston and Divine, who are the two bad guys, and they are scientistic in their worldview, and they're being interviewed by Oyarsa, who is the spiritual leader of this planet, and so they don't know the language very well. So they give these answers in highfalutin humanist rhetoric, and then Ransom translates it into normal language. Uh, well, what they're really saying is, and you know, so in their mind, they want to do things that are going to benefit the human race, and they don't care what happens to other people. In fact, they don't care what happens to individuals as long as their theories about what's best for the human race are followed. They're a lot like the Marxists in that way. And Oyarsa says, look, you guys think you're relativists, but really you have simply taken one of the laws of God, pulled it out of the context of the rest, and made it into a blind little Oyarsa in your brain while you're ignoring all the rest. And in context is a pretty good analysis of what they're doing and what modern philosophy tends to do. So, yeah, you find a conflict between yourself and reality and between yourself and yourself, because you have to say that for example, statements about right and wrong are just really statements about how you feel. Murder is wrong just means I don't like murder. And so all your love for other people can possibly be is a different set of chemical reactions in your head. And yet you can't leave it at that. You can't treat them like that.
And it touches really so many areas, right?
It really does.
And I think one of the products is, I mean, I think something that relates to this is Schaeffer's concept of they're embracing arbitrary absolutes. So they've removed really the biblical absolutes or the absolutes of the Christian ethic, and they've replaced it with arbitrary absolutes. And then later on, even as we begin to, you will know this as much as me. I'm always studying culture, analyzing what it's doing, and what I see right now is a lot of instances where they've rebelled against the Christian ethic, but now those arbitrary absolutes that they have in their different sort of worldviews are actually conflicting with each other.
It really is pushing us to a level of insanity that we haven't seen before.
So as we talk about tension more and about how to speak with people, I believe that what Schaeffer is saying is that tension exists in the world, and it's going to come out when people don't live consistently with God's reality that He has made, and therefore it's a place where we can speak. And he also talks about us needing to be speak with graciousness, truth, and love. I do believe the Scripture also sometimes gives us the authority to rebuke, but I think a lot of times we start with the truth and love, and stick and remain with the truth. And if we have to, maybe rebuke in some cases. I've heard about rebukes actually leading to people's salvation before. That may be rare, but yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I think Schaeffer was on to a lot of things, but one of the things he was really on to was the importance of individual conversation.
Mm-hmm.
There's, you can't do this very effectively in social media.
Yes.
As I discovered,
and fragmented
trying to bring out in a very polite and ironic way the tension between what people were saying in that setting, it just wasn't possible. In personal conversation, you can effectively have a chance to let somebody realize the tension they're under, and consider the possibility that there's a way to alleviate it, and that way is Christ.
All right, so I think Dr. Williams nailed his analysis of Dr. Schaeffer's tension and worldview. So as we take that notion and examine it a little bit more deeply, I want you to think about something of that definition that's given, and I'm going to give my own specific definition that's really close to that, which is specifically when worldview and presuppositions conflict with the reality that God has made. And so start with that first part, worldview. A person's worldview and a person's presuppositions, those are the way that a person sees the world, the lens through which they look and interpret the world. And so when that worldview or lens conflicts with the reality that God has made, it forms a tension because they are not able to interpret the world before them rightly. And it starts with some very basic things, but that concept itself is what Schaeffer's getting at. So it's technically impossible for atheists to be consistent with their own worldview because they live in God's world. And if they live in God's world, there are markers of God's existence, God's creation, and in fact, man's humanity and the world around him are actually testifying to the nature of God right before him. And so, as we think about it, it looks a little bit like this, and this is how Schaeffer depicted it. This is my re-illustration of that same chart that he used in his book. And so on the right hand, so right hand, the logical conclusion of a man's non-Christian presuppositions. And then on the left hand, the real world, or the external world, and man himself. And so there's a tension between those. But really, though, as Schaeffer points that horizontal way, there is technically a downward kind of upper and lower thing going on as well, because those tensions actually impact him in his overall existence. And this is one of the reasons why when we reveal that, we reveal some of the truths as we begin to do what Schaeffer calls taking the roof off. We remove some of those presuppositions and set them aside and give that person truth. Then the reality of God's world, if they're honest, it will hit them. And so man is constantly deflecting things, and as Schaeffer says, man is regularly constructing a world, a roof over his head to sort of deflect this tension. And so as we think about that, here's a quote from Schaeffer specifically. There is a real tension in being a modern man because no one can live at ease in the area of despair. A Christian knows that this is because man has been made in the image of God, and though man is fallen, separated from God by true guilt, yet nevertheless he has not become a machine. The fallenness of man does not lead to machineness, but the fallen manness. Therefore, when people feel this utter despair, this is a titanic pressure. So the tension of modern man is exasperated because the more man has constructed his own philosophies about how he came to be, he has formed other viewpoints that are godless. And being godless, then he begins to view himself as either an animal or a machine, or an animal machine. And in that way, he is bringing himself into titanic pressure because he's not viewing himself as he truly is, as God made him to be, a man made in God's image. And so very distinctly different. And so, as Schaeffer says in this next quote, he seeks to deflect. So man today seeks to deflect this tension by saying that he is no more than a machine. But if he were no more than a machine, he would find no difficulty in proceeding step by step down the line to the logical conclusions of his non-Christian presupposition. Man is not a machine, however, even if he says he is. So what Schaeffer is saying, that he cannot live consistently with this notion of being just a machine. We think about ourselves as we, in our daily lives, we live in a culture that is heavily adopted machinery. We take machines apart, we deconstruct them, and they become almost throwaway in some respects because there's so many of them. Man can't live like that. Man can't be some just disposable entity. He is something deeper than that. So one of the reasons is that man is in conflict with his own, what Schaeffer calls mannishness. He's in a natural tension. So in this chart, as you see, this is my chart, when mankind tries to be God, that's that upper arrow, he fails in the process and lowers himself to that position of the animal machine. So this is what Schaeffer is saying. He becomes less than man. So when mankind puts himself in that role of God, he degrades his own existence in the process. Man cannot be God without God, and man must attempt to define his own existence. And so man concludes that he is a mere accidental animal machine that puts him morally and ethically in conflict with the reality that God has made. He becomes less than man. So think about it for a second. If you unpack this notion, if your whole universe just came about by accident, just by chance, then, and you are just accidentally one of the animals that actually gets cultivated just perfectly so in the right circumstances in the right planet, where you get this ability to have intellect, and that you somehow are in this special machine, but really just a machine and just an animal. And so you're just accidental in that animal machine functionality. And the difficulty with being that is that man has been made in God's image. He is not an animal, and he is not a machine. And so his mannishness becomes a tension within his own existence. So if I think that I'm an animal machine and I interpret myself that way, and I interpret other human beings that way also, I will come into conflict with their existence as mannishness, because I really have no basis for ethic or law other than a natural specific type of law, maybe like animals. So hunt and be hunted, is a perfect example of that. Or machines where I'm disposable, I'm replaceable, I'm just another cog in the wheel. And that dehumanizes man himself, but also makes it impossible for man to reason from his own state without some revelation from God, or without borrowing in some way from the world that he sees, or from the romantic notions that are still in society that are in actuality a holdover from the biblical ethic. And so that's really our next topic there, is that this biblical tension arises. So realize that when man puts himself in that role, then what he has is no basis for ethics or law, so he embraces what Schaeffer calls arbitrary absolutes. He puts arbitrary things in the place of God. Okay, so he rejects the Bible. He has no basis for ethics or law. He rejects the biblical ethic. He may honor the biblical ethic romantically, but he's still inconsistent. And he embraces these arbitrary absolutes. Now, arbitrary absolutes conflict with reality, so they're not going to work ultimately with reality. It may work somewhat temporarily, but they will eventually show their conflict. Now, arbitrary absolutes often conflict with each other. So it's interesting right now, as we're seeing in society, we're actually seeing different worldviews come about that are technically would be considered on the same side, but they are conflicting with each other. And so because of that, it leads to generations of chaos and decline, and man technically is destroying himself. And so having an understanding of these things in their proper scope begins to help us take people back to the reasoning why they need biblical ethics. We see how far astray people have gone from the biblical ethic. And so we need to call them to a return to values, but not just for values' sake, but because that these values are the shape of true reality as God has made it. And so when we do that, we begin to communicate effectively to a fallen world. And so that's one of the reasons specifically for this podcast, is that we would take this notion of tensions very seriously and then begin to cultivate how we can actually respond, how we can actually speak truth to tension. All right, so I think we'll stop there, but I want to encourage you to, as always, truth without love is ugly, and love without truth is compromise. And always speak truth to tension.